Today on the Modern Motherhood Podcast, I'm just going to say you have to be my new best friend. I hope you don't mind.
I would have it no other way.
Well, I would love that. I have Kennesha Buycks with me today, and she is designer extraordinaire, mother to 4, foster mom, and she is someone you're just going to love. Kennesha, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
And you are just in hot from Seattle. How you liking the weather here?
It's amazing. Although it's a little humid, so.
It's a little.
Yeah.
Well,
it's a little humid. But I'm from Alabama, so.
So, you know how to deal with it. Right. Well, we love Seattle. We have Krista Media there. That's who the podcast is through. And so I'm just excited to have somebody from the motherland with me today. So tell us a little bit about yourself. I know you've got 4 babies. You live in Seattle. Tell me about your husband, your work, all the things.
Yeah. So 4 kids, 3 boys, 1 girl, and a husband, Larry, who was in the military for 10 years. And we got out like 10 years ago. And moved to Seattle, and he now works as the CFO for our church. He's been in finance for 15 years. Mm-hmm. That's a long time.
Yeah.
But he just loves it. He's a money guy, and I need him in my life because I'd be broke, and I would be broke without him and on the streets. And we live in Seattle and have been there now for almost 11 years, which is, everyone always says, oh my gosh, you live in Seattle, you're from Alabama. That's such a huge transition. But we didn't really, because of the military, we were kind of all over the place. So Alabama, I haven't lived in Alabama in 20 plus years. So Seattle's been easy for us. So it's a really great place that we love raising our kids, and we have developed really, really good community there, and live in a foster community, actually, where I feel like we're living this life that probably all of, you and I, we lived 30 plus years ago, where you could literally go knock on your neighbor's door. Well, we're in Texas, so it's maybe a little bit different.
It's pretty friendly here, I have to say.
Yeah, I was going to say, Seattle's not that way, surprisingly. Mm-hmm. That's sarcasm. But, in this neighborhood, we have this little community where everyone is just really close, and our kids can actually just go outside and play, and I don't have to worry about them, which is, again, really unique. We've never had that. Right. So, Seattle, it's been amazing for us.
So how is a foster community something that you develop? Is it something you move into? How do you identify if you're in a foster community?
So specifically for us, our church started this community called the Rose Hill Cottages through City Ministries, which is a division of the church. And it literally is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that owns the cottages that we live in, or that everyone lives in the community. So it's designated specifically through the state of Washington to host families that foster. And we are one of those families. I think there's 22 homes in the neighborhood, and I think about 17 of those are available for foster families.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you think that impacts the foster experience? Because I've got families in my home church who are fostering and love what they're doing. They have a lot of support from the people around them, but there is a sense that they're kind of lone wolves out there. I mean, they are trying to take on that monster that is the foster care issue.
Yeah.
And, sometimes a child they thought might be theirs by adoption eventually, middle of the night, they've been taken back to birth family or whatever. So how do you think that being able to be in community it changes that experience for foster families?
I think so. In our neighborhood, we kind of have 2 things happening. We have respite care providers, and then we have full-time foster families. So for our family, we are not full-time foster care. We are respite care providers. So every month, 10 days out of the month, we have the option of having a child in our home. So I think being in the community for us has been extremely helpful in the sense that if we have issues, or if we've come into situations where we've faced difficulties with the kids, because, a lot of these kids are coming from really broken homes and from things that you couldn't even imagine would happen to anyone. Very young kids who have had lots of trauma in their lives. So you can imagine they come into these spaces with a lot of baggage. So it's just been really cool, for lack of a better word, to experience that. There's camaraderie. So people who are going through the same thing as you. I think we are in a really unique situation. I mean, I'm sure maybe across the country there's other foster communities maybe similar to ours. I do think it's unique in the sense that in addition to just being in the community itself is right beside our church.
Right.
So the licensing office, the agency, it's steps away from the neighborhood. So even with that, there's support and there's advocacy from the office to support the people in the community. So as far as impact and how it affects us as a family or as a foster family, it's been extremely positive. We have a lot of people who do foster through the agency that do not live in the neighborhood, right? So speaking even to them, it's just kind of like you said, like you just feel like you're out there alone, even though we're all kind of connected and we have monthly meetings and they have lots of different activities for the kids and everything. But being in that community is very special. It's kind of bittersweet because again, just being in the genre that I'm in, home and everything, it's been a really interesting journey for me in the sense that we live in this house that we rent. And obviously we serve such a great purpose. And I always just think about the fact that like we're giving something to these children, but I think even more importantly, they've given something really meaningful to us that makes me emotional and to our kids. Mm-hmm. I mean, speaking of just that impact alone has been beautiful and transformative and amazing for us and restorative and healing in a lot of ways. So I think that we are able to kind of walk this journey, if you will, of living in this space that's temporary, that's not ours, it doesn't belong to us. And there's kind of always been, or at least over the past 2-3 years, this battle internally for me of longing for that home that I've always wanted, but also understanding that we have such great purpose where we are right now, even though it's a home that we don't own. So there's always a tension there for me, but I think bigger picture, it's been just such a beautiful process. And honestly, I think God really unfolding in a lot of ways his purpose in our family and bringing out a lot of gifts, I think, in my kids that I didn't know were there. And not that we wouldn't ever know, because God, God is God and he's sovereign and he's going to use whatever he's going to use. But I feel really blessed that we have had the opportunity over the past almost 5 years, which is, I can't even believe it's gone by that fast. We've lived in the neighborhood for 5 years, to see the hand of God move in a way that I don't think we would be able to see in other areas. Right. So he's really used that in a really big way.
Well, it's an intense season. And the things that come out of intense seasons, even those intense seasons can be good. We think of intense so often as something that's a crisis or a trauma, but that's not always true. You can have really wonderful things that you're doing that make for intensity. But man, it does seem to be in those intense seasons that we see some of these things expressed that maybe we would have taken longer had their pressure not been there, even that good pressure.
True.
So a military marriage. Military marriages are different. They have different challenges.
Yes,
so
they are.
What was it like during those years that your husband was in the military? You were moving around a lot. And how do you contrast that to where your marriage lands today with a situation that, yes, is more stable, but again, that longing for home. I have that heartbeat. I moved around a lot as a kid. I wanted, my house and put down roots and be able to stay. And we've had far more moves than I expected in our marriage, not to the level of military. So that heartbeat of yours to have home, but then to also be married to someone that their very job necessitates that home is a very nebulous concept.
Yes, it is.
So what was that like in those early years of marriage?
I think my lack of knowledge, my being naive really benefited me because I don't think I understood, when Larry and I got married, we were 21 and 22, we were babies, even though I thought I knew everything. I mean, when someone in my family reacted to the fact that I was getting married and saying, really essentially rejecting the idea, I made sure to tell that person that I was a grown woman. Little did I know. I was nowhere near that. And so I think about those earlier years of our marriage and Larry being in the military. Every season has its pros and cons, right? Strengths and weaknesses or whatever. But I think for those early years, I didn't really understand the impact, I think, of picking up every 3 years, which is how often we moved, and how much that would take a toll on my heart. I don't think there would be any way for me to even acknowledge that at that point, because I'd lived in the same house for my entire life. I mean, for 20 years, I lived in Gunnersville, Alabama, in my grandmother's home. So it was just a foreign concept to me. So moving around in that way affected our marriage, definitely. I mean, we were both babies, for one. We had no money. We were living on a military budget. We were moving every 3 years. But I would say those are some of the negatives. I think on the flip side, spiritually, I think the strength that we have now is because of those years. There were so many things that I can think about as I look back on our relationship and what God was doing in us individually and as a couple that I know came from those years. We lived in Texas. We lived in San Antonio for 3 years. And that was probably one of the hardest spiritual, well, not one of the hardest spiritual years. The first time I encountered like feeling unsettled because we couldn't find a church. Mm-hmm. We were church hopping. We got from church to church. We lived there for 3 years. We never had a permanent home church. So all what that did is it really pushed us closer together. And we prayed a lot during those years. And then, now here we are almost 20 years into marriage. We'll be at 18 years in August. And we are so much strong. I mean, when you were asking me the question, the word that literally popped into my spirit was just like stronger. And it's almost even that word as it comes is just like, it's almost like a prophecy in some ways, because it doesn't just feel like you're stronger because of those years, but not only that, but I'm going to make you stronger. And it's a promise, right? Like it's not that some, personal prophetic word for me necessarily, even though I feel like in this moment it probably is, but that's for all of us. That's what God wants to do. He wants to redeem and restore and make us stronger by his spirit.
I think military marriages and those who are following military, my dad doing the work that he did with the shuttle system, we sort of followed the military. So we were very aware and we moved quite a bit during my high school years because of his career. And I think when you're in that zone, it's difficult sometimes to make friendships because people are aware you're going to be gone in 3 more years. It becomes very easy to only really associate with those within the military because you all understand what you're going through together. But I think that the willingness to really dig in and make friendships with people who, they may be reassigned, in 3 years and be gone, but the willingness to do that, those are friendships that have lasted for such a long time for life. The people that we encounter in those times. So
it's so true. We lived in Tampa, Florida. That's where my daughter Kendall was born. And those friends that we made, that was 12 years ago, we're the best of friends still today.
Right.
And I think not only, with the military thing, our hearts were always that wherever we were going to be all in. And it's still just who we are as a family in general. It's just like we teach our kids, like if we commit to something, we're going to do it all the way. And so for us, that's kind of always been this driving force is that whenever, even for the military life, if we are going to settle ourselves into any community, we have to give it our all. And I think the reward in that is, like you said, like the relationships and the friendships that we've developed that have really held up over time because we, not just us, but it was a reciprocal, thing.
Right. So here's what I find really interesting, that the fact that you've been a military family and you're settled now, but the fact ish. I'm sorry, ish. Yes, let's clarify ish. But this idea of someone for whom her heart cries home so much, and that any space you're going into, you're wanting to create this place that's reflective of you, that's reflective of where you want to gather with your kids and with your spouse and all of that. When did you know that ability to walk in and be able to picture where things needed to go and how that would be conducive to gathering? When did you know that was a thing for you?
Oh, probably before I was even married. Why does this make me emotional? I'm like, I tear up at everything I answer. I feel like God is like working in me, my heart right now. But, I don't know. I just think memories sometimes do that.
I think it's the interviewer.
Yeah. It's you. It's for sure. It's you.
I mean, God and the interviewer.
So a little bit of backstory. My grandmother we had no money. She had no money. Even though I never knew that growing up, which is really crazy. But she loved home and she loved decorating her home. So our home was beautiful. I mean, we had custom drapes. We had custom upholstery. Like she would, and I didn't know this until well after she passed away, but she would like open an account, with the local upholsterer, or she would make friends with, someone who could do some of the work, and she'd make payments on these things because they were important to her. And of course, because she was so amazing and people loved her, they would do things, as a friend or a favor or whatever. But I don't think I realized it until now I'm 40. I'm looking back, or I look back and I think I remember being really proud when I brought friends to my house as like an 11, 12, 13-year-old girl, showing my friends, like, look at the new sofa, touch it. Doesn't it feel good? Or, oh my gosh, look at the drapes or look at the floor. We just got the floors redone. You know, all those things. I remember noticing them. My uncle was an architect, so I used to think I wanted to be an architect just because he was an architect. So I remember the drafts, I think is what they call them, looking at his and like mocking them and drawing them and exploring even like what I wanted my future home to look like. So I think that for me, all of those things kind of set the foundation for my love of the aesthetic of home. I don't think I understood home until 7 or 8 years ago. We had just moved back to Seattle, and we lived in a little 70s Rambler that had not been touched since the 70s. And I hated it. I was determined to love it. And right in the middle of my determination to love it, my mom died. And that just tore my world apart, as anyone who's lost a mom or even not could imagine. And so it was just kind of crazy because during that time, while I was grieving my mom, God was also working contentedness in my heart and really discovering that home wasn't just a place. Obviously, it's also just even speaking to me about the home of our hearts and how I was allowing God to reside in the home of my heart. Because all the things that I grew up with, you know, the pretty drapes, the sofa and the nice flooring and all those things were great. But what I realized is there had been this disconnect because of the type of home that I grew up in that was slightly dysfunctional. I had placed so much value in that because that's what I saw value placed on.
Right.
So I think at that time when I lost my mom, it was just like this crazy journey of discovering myself and discovering some things that God really wanted me to embrace and get me to a place where I understood that home wasn't just a place and that it was essentially it boils down to it's all about him, which everything goes back to him anyway, right? Mm-hmm. But yeah, it was just this kind of crazy journey of discovering that. And so directly answering your question, I think a lot of my love for home came from my childhood. Very practically, I saw those things. But I found a new love for home during that time and really understanding the depth of the spiritual side of home more so during that time as well.
I do think when we have those times that are so transitory, mm-hmm. you know, in the loss of a parent or in the midst of a move or when things didn't quite turn out the way that you expected or you're living in a place that you really, really don't like.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think those are the times that we really begin to determine what is most important mm-hmm. to us. We had a move in which I'm sure this was probably contrary to some kind of law somewhere, but it's years past. I won't even tell you exactly where it was, but we had 6 kids at the time mm-hmm. and I was living in one place trying to get the house sold. My husband was living in the other place mm-hmm. trying to wait on us to get there. So he was living in a 1-bedroom apartment mm-hmm. and I was driving 12 to 13 hours every couple of weeks back and forth trying to be with him.
Yeah.
6 kids in a 1-bedroom apartment. I kid you not. I'm sure it breaks all
so
kinds
that means
of
8 people.
With 8 people in a 1-bedroom apartment with an air mattress and things like that. And I laughed at myself because as I headed down there to do Thanksgiving mm-hmm. with him, we're in the midst of trying to get this house to sell and all this kind of stuff. I run back in the house and I grab this little stuffed pilgrim that I have and a pumpkin because I wanted there to be some kind of decor. And I thought, you know, marking those seasons, that really must mean something to me because in this very transitory season, I at least wanted a couple of things that made it feel like Thanksgiving. And I started paying attention to that mm-hmm. because having that little, you know, I know for a beautiful designer like you, it's tacky as heck, this little stuffed pilgrim, I'm telling you, it really is. But that really meant a lot to have that kind of connection when everything was so transitory.
Yeah.
So tell me about when you started Restoration House as a website to be able to express this beautiful artistry that you have mm-hmm. in terms of creating beautiful spaces. How did that idea come about to start the blog and to begin to explore that?
Yeah, it was really actually around the transitional period of Restoration House, the blog. Was around the same time as my mom's death, actually a year after that, because I took kind of a year off to just grieve her loss. And then one day I feel like I've told this story so much and I feel like every time I should have more details, but I don't. One day I was on Instagram and I was scrolling and I saw a girlfriend's post, and this is the part that I should have more details for, and I don't remember what she posted. I just remember that it struck me in a way that it shouldn't have, which made me realize that it was God in that moment. I remember just sobbing, crying. I messaged her and said, you have no idea what you've done in posting this. And literally the picture I usually paint is just in that moment. It seemed as though over that year, everything was really just drab and gray and ugly. And in that moment, it was like a slow bleed in of color. Everything came back. And all of a sudden, I wanted to create again. And I've been a creative my entire life, drawing, reading, writing, all those things I was an only child. So those are things that I did to fill my time and that I enjoyed. And so when that happened, it was just like, literally, if you've seen images or even in the movies, people getting their first breath of air again, it was literally this first breath of air moment. And there was this flood of emotion and excitement for what I believed at that time God was going to do. So Restoration House started before that, and I was blogging before that, but not really, because I was using my website to post furniture that I was restoring at that time.
Right.
And so it was really just a place to kind of showcase furniture and sell furniture, and that was really it. But after my mom passed away, I had this hunger for expressing myself through the written word more than I ever had. And I felt like, I need to tell her story. So the first blog post that I wrote as the new Restoration House blog was my story of my mom's passing and the day that it happened, and honoring her and just showing the world how beautiful a person she was. And I needed that, I think, probably more than the world needed it, right? Like, it was therapy for me. My mother and I didn't have an amazing relationship, but she dealt with a lot of mental illness, and there was just a lot there. So I think that I needed to release that. Then I could get to, what God really wanted me to do. So over the past 8 years now, we have transitioned more into reflective writing, and I felt that it wasn't enough. So I really wanted to kind of connect what I was writing with the visual. So that's kind of where the home piece really came in a lot more than it had before. I mean, it was just the craziest thing. Like, I'd see a light switch and God would download in something that just was really reflective for me. And then I'd feel like I have to write about this. And it maybe sounds silly or weird or whatever, but it was just the way at that time things were working for me creatively. And then there just became this, deeper need to explore home in a way that I felt maybe people had done before, but I had never done before. Restoration House itself started, again, well before that, just with me doing, furniture restoration and everything. And it was me and my house before it was Restoration House, and it changed to Restoration House while we were in Hawaii. And that was probably one of the darkest seasons I've ever walked through spiritually. The furniture itself was really therapy for me, and it was also a way of communing with God. I remember I was kind of in the throes of really raising young kids.
Right.
And I needed something that was more than just mom. Right.
And I think those projects like that, they close a loop for us,
yes.
right? Everything is so wide open at the end of the day.
Yes.
So when you can finish a piece of furniture or you can finish a piece of writing, you feel like at least
I've done something.
Yeah. I can check the box. Yeah.
Yeah. So I remember just having this yearning and this hunger for, oh my gosh, I have to get the kids to bed so I can go outside to the garage and paint.
Yeah.
And it became this time of communion between God and I, where, as I'm stripping layers of paint off, he's paralleling that with my own life and saying, this is what I'm doing in you. And so shortly after, those things were kind of beginning, I decided to change the name to Restoration House. And that's kind of where the name came from, because I felt like God was using the furniture to restore me and our family in the season that we were in.
I love the name because I think it's so layered. I just think there's so much to it, and it just is so powerful. We'll be right back with Kennesha. You are so appreciated, my friend. When I talk with our content coordinator, Rebecca Beckett, and with our producer, Donna Toti, we are just blown away by your response to the podcast, the way you tune in. And we want to make sure that we are bringing you the guests and content that encourage you in your life and who help give you the tools and information help you grow in your parenting, your marriage, your work life, and your spiritual walk. So be sure and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and get in touch with us at All Mom Does on the socials and at allmomdoes.com. We're pulling together new interviews and content for you, and we want to hear from you. So leave us your comments, your questions, and your suggestions when you head to allmomdoes.com. So I know, and you've made, reference to this. I mean, I think there are times that we start looking at all of the home shows and all the books and all the things, and we can start getting down this path of, oh man, I really need to replace this or that because now they're not good enough based on the new optics that I'm seeing from this whatever person. And you said that at your grandmother's house, it was this, oh, look at the new curtains and the new couch and how beautiful. So how did you span, and how do you span in your work? Because the reality is, we don't want to be materialistic, of course.
Right.
But I can watch people in well thought out, lovingly laid rooms. It really does create a sense of community. I mean, I think that too often we just go all in on one way, which is too materialistic and thinking we don't measure up if our house doesn't look like this.
Yep.
Or we go all in the other way. And I've spent some seasons there with 8 kids in rental houses thinking, forget it, it's a dorm. I don't care. I give up. So how did you begin to really make the connection that beautiful spaces would gather people in this way? And how do we really make sure that in the spaces that God's given to us that we're responsible for, regardless of whether we've got the latest couch or curtains or whatever, what can we do to make sure that we're using our resources in our homes to be those kind of gathering places?
I think for me, it's 2 things. So the first thing is I realized that in hard seasons, just like most of us, because we're all human, I was choosing to detach myself and isolate from everything that God had given to me, which was my community. And so my personality, I don't know, are you into Enneagram?
Yes, ma'am.
So I'm a number 4, and I tend to force myself to do things when I know that at the end it's going to result in something really good, but it's going to hurt along the way. And I mean, crucify my flesh, if we want to say it by with scripture. But I just knew that I needed more than what I had. And what I had was essentially nothing. I had my family, which was amazing, but God created us for community. He created us to be in life with one another, or to do life with one another. And I knew that my family, we have a gift of gathering, and we have a gift of our home was meant to be a house of restoration. And so probably, I don't know, I felt really dead for 1 or 2 years, and it dawned on me that it was because I wasn't inviting people into our home. There was no life there. And I felt like I was also convicted because I was preaching this, but I wasn't doing it. So that's kind of how, practically, I guess, that's tangibly how that happened. But I think in order to create spaces that are restorative, that build community, that aren't just trendy, don't just carry trendy pieces, or that feel comfortable when people walk in. I talk a lot about home story, and that is why no one can see it, but the wall here you have in your space. There's something really special and empowering about that. I don't know if I really honestly, I talk about it, but I don't know if I really fully understand it just yet. But I'm captivated by the idea of a home and our homes telling a story and being a part of healing for the people that come in. So before I was really deep into really communicating a lot about home, I'm also passionate about just women and identity. But I think that totally can overarch, right? Just this whole conversation. So I think that when we can learn how to embrace every bit of who we are, every bit of our story, that emboldens and it encourages other people to do the same. And so when we take it into the context of the conversation of home, I think we can do the same thing. I think specifically as believers, we almost have a responsibility to do that.
Right.
Because there are people coming into our homes that don't know Jesus and who are broken. And we have so much power in us to be that healing and to be that restoration for people. So if someone can come into our homes and they can literally as they walk through the door immediately feel a sense of peace. That's not like just happenstance, right? I mean, beyond just bringing in pretty things, like we're creating a space and environment where God can meet people. First us, because it's our home and he's given it to us. But secondly, so that he can have an encounter with the people that come into our home. So I think embracing our stories allows for God to move in a way that maybe he wouldn't if we had, everything perfectly placed, or, we bought everything that is trending or really expensive or whatever, superficial versus really telling an authentic story with our spaces.
I love that idea of home story. And what Kennesha's referring to in my studio, I have a wall that I got so tickled when I found out that she was going to be able to come and we were going to be able to do this interview together. I thought, oh my goodness, I'm having a designer come into my house. Like, do I call a plumber, an electrician, or an arsonist? Like, I don't know what, but this wall she's referring to does have little bits and pieces of things that are important to me. A painting that my mom did, a painting that hung over my grandmother's couch, some of my dad's memorabilia from the shuttle program. And so I do think our homes tell a story, whether we're intentional with that or not.
That's true.
And I do find it interesting, and I'm glad people feel this way. A lot of times when I have people over, all I can see, Kennesha, is the mess. I mean, just the number of people in this house, what I see is the mess. But I love when people sometimes are able to say to me, I just love walking in because I just feel like it just feels like a home. It just feels like home. Yeah. And I'm like, well, okay. And I hope, I really hope your tetanus shot's updated too, but I'm really glad that it feels like home. Now I'm going to possibly step into some tender waters, but I want to get your feedback on this. Okay. I feel like when I look at people who are speaking into the way that we are designing our homes and the things that we're looking for and the things that are trending and the things that do make us feel comfort and feel welcome, I feel like there is an underrepresentation of women of color who are designers. I would not feel like, I just feel like, so what do you think that is about? Yeah. And how do we make that right? Yeah. Because there's so much creativity and so many beautiful things that can play in. I don't want to miss any of that in terms of different communities.
I think that in terms of why I think it is, and then again, there's no I don't have statistics or solid evidence, but this is from life experience and personal opinion. Or actually, this is actually somewhat factual. Just the fact that if you think about specifically in the U.S., you think about the history of women of color in this country and the position that they have held. People like me, have held in this country, and even more so specific inside homes. We were nannies, we were housekeepers, and when I say that, I want to clarify that it wasn't a choice, obviously. It wasn't like, because I think the narrative has been for a long time through media, movies, all these messages we receive, right? That there's this jolly, joyful, happy attitude attached to those positions, and there's not. So let's just go ahead and squelch that.
Right.
People did that because they didn't have the means to make a living for themselves. And sure, they took care of other families' children, but it was never something that they would have chosen to do had they other choices, right? So I think that the reason we today in 2019 are seeing still less women of color who are kind of saturating this area is because of that. I think that, if you're told along for a certain amount of time that you're not able to or not allowed or that this isn't your space, what's going to happen? You're going to believe it. So I think that it's up to me, it's up to you, it's up to people like us to, number one, have the conversations and recognize there is an issue. It's not bad. I think a lot of times too, there's so much trepidation in even broaching the subject because it's race. Oh my gosh. No one wants to talk about race.
Yeah.
But it's a fact. It happened, but we can do something about it. So I think that me writing this book was bigger than I thought it would be in relation to that. I've had so many women of color. I've sobbed in response to them saying, I now know that I can delve into this area that I love because I see someone like me doing it.
Right.
That's a big deal.
Yeah.
So I think that it's recognizing it again and giving people opportunity to just shine and show their gifts. And also, I can be really candid here, right?
Of course.
I think that a lot of Black women specifically feel like this is an area that's not theirs again because we've been fed the narrative that it's not. And I've had also women tell me that it's for white women. So I just think that I only say that because I think it's necessary to understand that there's a lot of deep-seated misunderstanding and a lot of deep-seated untruths that I think on a very practical level we can untangle, but we can also trust God to partner with him to do those things too.
Right.
There's so many opportunities and I have so many friends who are, you call me a designer. I mean, these women are designers. I mean, they have client after successful designers who are amazingly talented and do such a great job with what they do, who don't get the notoriety that a lot of other women do. And I do think it's time to kind of put the kibosh on that.
Right. Yeah. And let those voices be heard. Let the beauty of what's being created be seen. I think it's so powerful. I'm so excited about your new book, Restoration House, Creating a Home That Gives Life and Connection to All Who Enter. It is absolutely gorgeous. And I know it's so much more than just the beautiful pictures, but man, the beautiful pictures are beautiful.
Shout out to Tiara Sorority.
Oh, she did an amazing job with all this. And of course, the things that you put together for her to photograph, let's talk about that, are amazing as well. And I think anytime we have an opportunity to write something that's really very much on our hearts, much more comes out than just, the central message, although we have to stay true to the central message. So what do you want people to get from this book? What do you want them to experience when they pick it up and they begin, flipping through these gorgeous pages?
I think outside of the obvious, which is restoration, I think I would love for people to take my story, but parallel it with their own so that they can tell their own unique home story with the awareness that again, I think going back to what we were talking about before, it's just like when we take those stories and we begin to tell them in our homes, then we are conduits for the restoration of Christ for so many. And I think that that's really honestly a platform that I will continue to stand on probably for the rest of my life, is just embracing our unique calling, our unique story, and running with it.
And I think too, I love the permission that you're giving to let people let their homes tell their story. Absolutely. I think it's part of the contagion of having so much content we can look at all the time that we almost feel like we have to copy.
Yes.
Like we have to make it look, instead of something, we say these are inspiration pictures, but the reality is we are copycatting a lot of times. And hey, if you've copycatted something that makes you feel good and you think really is reflective of you, that's beautiful. But if it's making you feel less than, that you haven't achieved what somebody else was able to achieve in their physical space, that's an identity issue. I mean, the things we do in our homes really are so reflective of the identity things that we're sorting with. So I love that you're wanting to create a freedom for people to really tell their stories through their spaces so that their spaces can become places that are the conduits for more stories.
Yes.
Because home is a place where our story really grows. Kennesha Buycks, you're amazing. And I'm just going to be stalking you. I hope you don't mind. We got to have you back on again soon.
Yes, please.
Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Go to Restoration Home on Instagram to hang out with Kennesha, check out the beautiful spaces she designs, and to see the things she's passionate about. And while you're on the gram, swing by and say hi to me too. I'm Julie Lyles Carr on all the places social. Rebecca Beckett is our mighty content coordinator, and Donna Toti is our fearless producer. Let them know you appreciate them by subscribing to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts and by leaving a 5-star rating and review. It really does help get the word out. And be sure and check out allmomdoes.com and on the socials. There is no reason for you to feel like you're doing this mom thing all on your own. All Mom Does is a fantastic resource and community where you'll find other women navigating the same joys and challenges that you do. I'll see you next time on the Modern Motherhood Podcast.